Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this Achates live session, which has been pre-recorded for broadcast on Thursday, the 10th of October. Today, we're going to be talking about optimising the impact of your fundraising event. My name's Deborah Larwood, and I'm the Director of Income Generation here at Achates. We're a cultural sector consultancy supporting commercial and contributed income generation, as well as impact measurement, evaluation, business planning and strategy at an organisational and policy level, as well as offering leadership development, change management and recruitment. Our monthly webinar series of Achates Live takes a deep dive into key topics and areas of focus or challenge in both contributed and earned income generation. And whilst we of course acknowledge that Achates doesn't necessarily have all of the answers, what I think we do have is an overview of the sector itself, and we're really passionate about using that perspective and role in a supportive way. And finally, just to say that, as always, all of the information shared in today's session is of course live and correct at the time of broadcast. Now, I'm really delighted to be able to welcome our special guests this afternoon, who are going to be exploring the topic of fundraising events and maximising their success with me today. First of all, Elizabeth Barron, Fundraising and Commercial Director at Sheffield Theatres. Elizabeth brings over 25 years' experience of working in the third sector, working across both fundraising and commercial income streams, as well as also setting up and running a small chain of children's play centres and cafes. Elizabeth joined Sheffield Theatres back in 2021, firstly as head of fundraising before swiftly becoming the director of fundraising and commercial activity, where today she heads up the contributed income strategy as well as overseeing commercial income generation, including the World Snooker Partnership. It's great to have you with us, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Hi.
And second of all on our panel today is Liz McCarthy-Neal, Director of Development at Chichester Festival Theatre. Liz joined Chichester Festival Theatre in February of this year, following leading development teams at organisations such as Artichoke and Theatre Royal Stratford East. Before this, she was at the National Theatre, where she specialised in corporate fundraising and also brings experience from working, again, in the broader third sector for organisations such as Asthma UK. Hello, Liz.
Hello, great to be here today.
Thank you. Now, before we jump into our questions, a little on today's topic. Now, I was speaking with a cultural sector organisation only the other day as they get ready to deliver their own annual event. It's been in the making for the past 6 months, and once the event's taken place and the follow-up is in hand, it won't be long before they then start to plan the next one. It was a reminder to me that particularly for that annual gala or benefit or celebration event, it can often feel like a Herculean effort. So I'm really interested in exploring the myriad benefits that an organisation can derive from such a significant undertaking. Firstly, I think about the opportunity to bring the work of the organisation off the page and to connect supporters with that work and the impact that it drives in ways which are both memorable and unique. It's this chance to take the art form that you're working in and be creative as to how you weave it into the shape of an event and the proximity that you can provide to it for your event attendees. And as such, at an event like this, which is likely a one-off, it's not something which you'll replicate in the same way again. And that transient opportunity, I think, has the power to make a lasting impact on your community of supporters and advocates. Secondly, there's the prospect of opening up multiple ways for people to give and support the organisation. The traditional channels of income that we wrap into our fundraising events can be anything from selling tickets to holding auctions and running raffles, the old faithful pledge cards, for example, and so much more. And we can be creative in how we facilitate this giving through events in ways which really reflect the distinctiveness of our organisations and which feel joyful and meaningful in the process to the donor or supporter. In one of my previous roles, we had a donor who always chose to channel their giving into supporting fundraising events and essentially underwrote the costs of them. I think this was partly because they adored the sheer celebration and joy that comes through such fundraising activity, but also and critically because they really understood that to get it right could be costly, but that those events had the potential to capture the imagination and interest of a wide group of people. in turn helping to unlock additional giving from both current donors and also catalysing relationships with prospective ones. And then thirdly, there's the process that the wider organisation goes through in the planning. By committing to an event such as a gala, the company is really making a commitment to its current and future supporters and to the relationship that it's willing to forge with them. But more than this, to plan and deliver a truly unique and engaging event requires a collaborative and creative approach, which is often likely to extend far beyond your typical fundraising capacity and resources. So it presents an opportunity to engage a wider range of stakeholders, from colleagues working in production, curation, communications, all the way through to your Board of Trustees and other volunteers, because all of these people have an important role to play in helping the organisation to realise income in these engaging and creative ways. So there's much to gain from investing in the planning and delivery of these types of fundraising events, but as I acknowledged at the outset, they are not small undertakings. So how do we ensure that the balance of resource that's invested in these endeavours will see a proportionate return? And do we measure success just in the money raised on the night alone? I'm really excited to dig into this topic today with our panel. And at this point, I'm going to draw Elizabeth and Liz into the conversation. And I'd like to begin by asking each of you in turn just to introduce your organisation and work and share a little bit about your own experiences of fundraising events and what you've learnt along the way. Elizabeth, can I come to you first on that?
Certainly can. So I joined Sheffield Theatres, and it was my first artistic fundraising role. I've worked in many charities, which I tend to refer to them as charities, like healthcare, breast cancer, children, that kind of thing. So when I came to work for an arts organisation, it was extremely different. It was a really, really good challenge, having organised so many balls, so many sporting dinners, so many events in previous years. I'd never quite organised one on a stage before, let alone the Crucible stage, which is a magnificent stage. And the gala was already an established event that we held. It's in my experience, I tend to shy away from events just because I find return on investment not as profitable as other, and being very, very target driven in previous roles. That is something I'm extremely mindful of. And with my team doing anything now, we always put a cost of 4 to 1 on our activity. And that runs throughout all the fundraising work that we do. However, I am extremely aware that it is something that the city wanted, it is something that the organisation wanted, and people really do put it on their calendar, and it's our flagship event. So I was kind of faced with me being a little bit apprehensive to put this event on in my first year, to being, yeah, we've got to do this, but it has to raise more money. And I was very quite definite from the start. It came across a few challenges from senior teams. They were, because it had never been done before, some of the ways that I conduct charity work in terms of asking, it's never been done here before, and it just kind of took a little bit of coaxing, a little bit of trust in them seeing the way that I worked, and actually I wasn't going to offend people or, you know, do anything out there that was going to be really out there. And yeah, I mean, the first one that we did coming back from COVID, we raised nearly £75,000 from that, and that was far went above the others that we'd ever done. So I was really, really pleased with that. And don't get me wrong, there were some learnings that we took from that, but it was just great for me as well. And I'm learning more. So I've done 3 now while I've been here, and every year it's just great to have all the skills of lighting and sound, and not to mention all the artistic direction that we get. We enlist the artistic team, the artistic director. We heavily base it around a show as well. So we tend to do it when we have a show that's quite uplifting. So this year we did it around Chariots of Fire. Our gala was slightly different this year, that people came to see a show, and then we had something out in the foyer, which was more of a relaxed thing with the cast, whereas previous galas have been your typical sit down on the stage, tickets and performances. We get wardrobe involved and use, all the props and things that make great talking points. For me, it's great to see how amazing the company are wanting to be involved in the process and the night. I have no problem in getting my colleagues enthusiastic about the gala, and we really do, as an organisation, have it as our flagship event of the night. I get very great support from the exec team and my SMT colleagues. We have, to the point of, on the night, we have a member of SMT sat on every table. We have a cast member sat on every table, and that keeps the conversation. They are there to host that table. We also give people the we brief them on the people that are on their table, and they are there to make sure that guest experience is the best it possibly could be. So it has been a learning curve for me from, I don't want to do an event, I don't want to do a gala, a ball, a dinner, I don't think it raises enough money, to actually now being, what can we do next? What can we do next? And we did something very different, like I said, this year, and I'm already thinking next year, how can we make it into more of a thing through the day and then end in an event at the night time? And there's just lots and lots of ideas.
Lovely, thank you, Elizabeth. I really, that point about it being a flagship event is probably, I'd imagine, where lots of organisations want to get to in their own sort of annual fundraising event. So absolutely wonderful to hear that, you've got that culture of engaging within the organisation, and that different departments are drawn in and you're celebrating their talents and their strengths. I also really heard what you said towards the beginning about, coming from perhaps with the broader third sector, sort of not being afraid to ask, and how sometimes that might mean that within an organisation there's a bit of gaining of trust, bringing people along with you so that everyone feels really comfortable as to how that proposition lands and looks and sounds. I'm really keen to get into some of the things that you picked up on around sort of the artistic vision and who leads on that, as well as the return on investment, but I'm going to save that for a little later on, and thank you so much. Liz, let's come to you next, please.
Hi there. So I have had the pleasure of working on events that range from the big National Theatre galas all the way down to not having an events team at all, or a development events team at all. At CFT, we have a very small but very perfectly formed events team here, and the way that we run as an organisation is that we run a festival model. So our festival season, which is our produce work, runs from April to October. And within that time, we do about 140 events. A lot of events for development, yes. It's a huge amount. And within that, we do our big flagship event, the gala, as well. The gala is a relatively new event. This is just the second year that we did it around Oliver. And yes, I think there's lots to discuss later on about the structure of that event, what it means, what it's used for, and that return on investment, and whether it is about making money. It always is, but what else do we use it for, and how important is it to the organisation? I know that we're strapped for time, so I'm keen to dive right in, and ready to go.
Wonderful. Thank you, Liz. Wow, 140 events. Okay, good. So let's take our sort of starting point then around that sort of the purpose of such events. So I'm really interested in your thoughts around the applications of a gala type event for the purposes of stewardship and for the purposes of cultivation. I mean, do you feel like you're always doing both of those things, or are you choosing to prioritize cultivation over stewardship because of that fundraising sort of imperative that often comes with the targets that we set around an event like a gala. Liz, I'll come back to you first on that. If that's
Yeah,
okay.
sure. So I think it's a really interesting question, and one that we're spending a lot of time on here at the moment. Because of the nature of the festival and the fact that we do 140 events, and we've got a very, very, very large and loyal donor base here at CFT. The majority of the events are stewardship events, and I would say 90, maybe more percentage of them are stewardship events, and we are assessing that as a department and moving more towards the cultivation. Even the gala was set up really as a stewardship event. Yes, it raised money, but it was definitely not a fundraising event. For example, there is no ask on the night at all. It is all about ticket sales and premium ticket sales, and making sure that that's where the money is raised, and corporate sponsorship of the event as well. There is no ask on the night. As we build that gala and it becomes, as it already is now, one of those hottest ticket in towns, everybody wants to come. We started to think about, what does that look like? How can we make it more special, and how can we build an ask in there? It's really interesting that and the idea that it would be more of a stewardship event and not have an ask on the night was definitely something that was driven by our development committee and the volunteers around that area, because they felt like it would be a stronger event without that ask. So it's going to be an interesting and delicate balance as to how we navigate through that area. But I, for one, I'm kind of certain that next year there will be some kind of ask on the night, and how that's going to work is a different matter. But as I've only been here 8 months, so still learning about the place and all the politics around it.
That's so interesting. Thank you, Liz. And also, I have to say, I think even when we're stewarding supporters, let's be honest, we are, of course, just quite naturally cultivating their ongoing interest. So we are cultivating at the same time often, even if we're not maybe making that ask in that space.
Yeah, I agree, but I think that I think it's just a bit of a culture here, and just needs to be a little bit more of a culture shift towards the asking. And what I've found is, when you do ask, even just in a larger fundraising sense, and we do more asks at events, or perhaps direct campaigns, the response is always really good. There's perhaps been a little bit of a nervousness of because our donors are so loyal and we have so many of them, but I think that we need to be a bit bolder.
Absolutely. Elizabeth, I'm going to draw you in, particularly that comment that you made earlier about sort of building trust. Let's talk a little bit about your experience of that cultivation stewardship mix.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you, Liz, say that there's not a culture of asking, because before I came here, that's all I've known. That is absolutely all I've known. So when I came, and there was this scaredness to ask, and I came, and I think, like I say, at first they were very like, oh, you're going to offend somebody, or you're going to, and there is a certain way of doing it, isn't there? I don't think there is a place for not having an ask. I think that we tend to do things like meet the casts and things like that, where we don't particularly have an ask, not a big ask anyway. But at the gala, certainly we ask. They know from day one that why they're coming, and that's to support the charity. Interestingly, this year though, I am very so the gala last year, so all our galas have a target on the night that we're very open about. They have and what that money is going to raise, a specific thing. So we've had the 50th anniversary, then the year after we had to raise funds to go towards access, so whether it be SL or whatever, and I think it's really great that it opened up people's knowledge base on what we could do with access, as well as raising funds on the night. This year I was very conscious that our gala, attracts our wonderful, wonderful donors. And so there is a certain level of ticket price that obviously people who want to support the theatres can't afford. And we wanted more people to experience these fantastic events, experience meeting the casts, experience the catering facilities that we've got here, that kind of thing. So this year, that's why we made the very, very conscious decision to do it around a show. So we could have 1,000 people, obviously, in the Crucible, and we still had £15 tickets to come to the gala performance. And we didn't ask anything of them. So they still experienced the gala as it was, a gala performance, but we still made income from the people that stayed afterwards. And it was a very conscious decision that we wanted to be open for everybody, and we didn't want to kind of section everybody off. Plus as well, that's now fed our donor pool as well. So we now have these people that wanted to come and experience it at £15 a ticket, and we now have those to work on to feed into their donor journey as well. So I think a mixture of both is, and actually speaking to the chap that actually interviewed me and took me on, he's not here now, but I do think that was one of the reasons why I got the position in the first place, was because I had the knowledge of other charities and the asking, and that I wasn't afraid to ask, and in a nice way, not to be too rash about it, but also treat people that either give the smaller donations or that can't donate right now but that could in the future. They are important too. They are part of the city, they're part of Sheffield Theatres, and we welcome them as well. And I think to have that balance is really, really important.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think for a lot of the sort of typical gala events, it is often that high price ticket. So it's really interesting to hear how you sort of have opened up that access to it and democratized the participation in philanthropy. I think that's really interesting. I wonder if I can move us on a little bit to think about working, that sort of team effort of any fundraising event, and in particular, how you work with people such as your trustees, a development committee or similar, if you have one. How do you usefully sort of engage and leverage their energies in ways which means that you're not sort of drawing too much of their time, but also that you're actually getting the maximum out of their energy and their sort of peer influence and so on? Liz, can I come to you first there?
Yeah, sure. We've got a brilliant development committee, very invested, and engaged board as well. So what we tend to do for every one of those 140 events, but generally around the bigger ones, obviously some of the smaller ones they're not needed at, but the big ones like the press nights, the supporters nights, we will establish who's coming from the board and the development committee. We will then go through our guest list and we will match up people to our the volunteers. So we'll make sure that every single one of our guests has a board member or a development committee member assigned to them. This was quite a new thing that I brought in when I started here, and it has been kind of transformative for them. I think, they don't necessarily get to speak to everyone on the list, but it means that as they arrive there, they know they've got a purpose and that they're there to talk to our guests and to make them feel welcome. We usually give them a couple of notes to make sure they know, what sort of thing we want to talk to them, want them to talk to our donors about. And it's worked really well, actually. They feel like they've got a bit more of a focus on those nights, and obviously our donors feel very special because the chair has come over to talk to them, or the chair of the development committee, or whoever. And I suppose that's also about trying to match up those needs to the people that we know are in the room. So if there's somebody there that we know is particularly interested in sustainability, we'll make sure that the person who looks after sustainability on the board is matched up to them so they can have a nice chat about that. And that's worked really well for us. It has worked really well. I think that it's one of those things that I've struggled with in the past in other jobs that I've had, that perhaps we've not had that same engagement to come to those events. It's sometimes a bit difficult when the events are all over the country. But again, because of the loyalness of the way that the supporter networks are here, our development board and board itself are very committed, and we have good attendance on those events, and they're very, very supportive, and some of them even host events for us, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think, you know, from what you're saying, it sounds like that preparation is paying dividends, like taking the time to understand who's in the room, sensibly matching them up, and also making sure that that trustee or development committee member has got some resources or tools that they are pointed in the right direction. I think that's fantastic. And Elizabeth, when you were speaking earlier, you know, you'd mentioned, I think, that in the gala, sort of the dinner, the seated format, you've got members of SMT sitting on the table, perhaps a cast member. What about the sort of the way that you work with those other sort of volunteers, those trustees and dev committee people?
Yeah, so we have a fundraising committee, and this is something that I love about the arts. I think their involvement and drawing on my experience from other charities, the committees do seem to be more physically involved at attending events and things like that, in my experience. Our fundraising committee are great in terms of they're a really great mix of some like to just be asked questions, or they'll send it out to their contacts, things like that. Others like to be there on the night. I think what you said, Liz, about giving them a purpose, I think is absolute key. We've got members of SMT that aren't as vocal. You know, not everybody is, are they? You know, they have their specific strengths, and they're not as outgoing and things. So, but we are very. I do include every member of SMT purposely to give them a purpose as well. And we've got one that loves to be on bags and coats. You know, she's like, yeah, put me on bags and coats. Put me on bags and coats, because that is their purpose, and then they get chatting to people naturally. It's not about, really, I think, saying to people, you must go over and you must say to that person. It might be like, oh, so and so's just had a grandchild, and you know, and they've done this and they've done that, and it's just like openers and conversation starters. And it turns out the person that likes to be on bags and coats really likes handbags, so it's a really great conversation starter to put them on bags and coats. But I think to give people a purpose, they don't like to be a spare part, I find. They don't, you know, if I'm coming and I'm going to support, which is brilliant. Now, the way that I work in terms of preparation, so myself and the fundraising team, there's always one lead on the fundraising team, and I try and not make that be me. So there's a lead on the fundraising team that kind of keeps everything, is like the glue that keeps everything together. But then I will go to SMT and say, this is what we've got going on with the gala, and they feed back. And then as it gets nearer to the gala, we have an SMT meeting every week, which we have a section on the gala, which gets them invested as well. They all of SMT and trustees and fundraising committee contribute to prizes. They're all asked at every level to contribute to prizes and ideas and that kind of thing. And like I say, we don't force people to come on the night if they don't want to, because their strength might be, actually, do you know what, I've got 20 other people to attend because that's the business that I'm in. But actually on the night it's not my kind of thing. So I think it's about drawing on every individual's specific strengths and harnessing that, and I think the arts is brilliant for that, because there are so many different strengths that I'd never considered before in another charity. It was brilliant when I came here. That was like, oh God, that's a thing. We can work with that, and that really gets me enthusiastic about, like I say, the next one and what else can we do. And we did, just kind of going off gala for a second, this year we had our first ever 10k team, people running in aid of Sheffield Theatres, and we had 22 runners, and people never knew that we were a charity and people could do that. And you know, so just kind of putting it out there that we can draw on everybody's individual talents and strengths, I think is brilliant.
I think what you just said there is really key, Elizabeth, about we're a charity, because that's something that we struggle with here, and that message isn't, I don't think, as clear as it could be. And I think events play a really good part in that, because you can hammer home the fact that you are a charity, and that the donations, you know, they might get a wealth of benefits, particularly those at the more membership level, but actually the money is supporting a charity, and the work that we do is really important, and we can't do it without them. And you can really get those messages home in fundraising events. And I think, you know, aside from the money that you raise, that is just great messaging and something that's really valuable.
Yeah, the CEO actually ran it as well, ran the 10K, and when he came back, he said, "You were right, Liz." He said, "I was running around and people were shouting, 'Sheffield Theatres, yeah!'" And he's like, "And I've never kind of experienced that before in the arts." And I was like, "Yeah, it's not just about, I mean, don't get me wrong, we raised, well, by the time we finished, we'll probably have raised about £5,000, which is amazing. But it is more about people getting the message. I think it's the most difficult thing that I've found since I started working at Sheffield Theatres, is getting the message that we are a charity, and the work that we do is so important on so many levels, for mental health, for, you know, for everything. It's just so important, and we're often overlooked, and I think that is kind of the key messages from events, like you say, Liz.
Which is why I think, you know, and I'm sure we'll come on to return on investment, which I think is a really difficult one to qualify in events, because of this, because it's not just about the amount of money that you raise. Yes, of course, you've all got a target attached, and those return on investments can vary wildly, and it's so wild that it's almost not worth talking about numbers. But the purpose of those events is not always about raising money, or at least the secondary purpose can be about awareness, stewardship, getting key messages home, and those sorts of things, which I think are just as important and really valid.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think, you know, I'd love to put that question to you both, actually, in terms of budgetary expenditure. How do you recommend what proportion it looks like? But also, sort of as a side question to that, how do you work with colleagues across the organisation to really clarify what the objectives are from the financial, but the other objectives as well? What does, and sort of what good looks like? How have you navigated that in your respective organisations? Elizabeth, I'll come to you first on that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, so it's a difficult one, because I, coming from a very targeted background, even in my own businesses, I put targets on myself, and I think to always ensure growth is really, really important. To always ensure that, like I say, we work to a ratio of 4:1, but then also, if something came to me and said, this isn't, if one of my fundraisers came and said, I really want to do this, it's not going to raise the 4:1 that you ask. And so then we kind of look at it and say, okay, so let's look at what else is it going to bring. And down the line, there will be a financial gain at some point. So say, for example, legacy work, that isn't an on the night gift. You know, that's a long strategy, and so we kind of look at them like that, and when I put the strategy together, I kind of have that on my income stream as well, in terms of I have that as like this is what we're working on. Also, it's not going to raise in, so when I report to the board, I don't only report on the money that we bring in, I also report on, for example, our corporate fundraiser, who is amazing, works a lot on things in the city that give the theatres and people that visit the theatres and our staff discounts, and things for our health and wellbeing team. You know, we might have preferred restaurant providers that give us 20% discount, and car parking and things like this. So it's not just about what they bring to us financially. It's also not just about what they bring, as in bringing new customers in. It's what it brings to the organisation as a whole, and the city as a whole as well. You know, I encourage my fundraisers to go to like freshers fairs and things like that, and yes, they will in turn bring something in, but they attended one yesterday, which obviously didn't bring any money in yesterday, but it did attract 40 new members. So actually that's going to get people coming to the theatres. I also am director of commercial activity as well, so I've obviously got my bar hat on as well, and think, well, if they're coming to the theatres, there's a secondary spend, and so I think it is looking at it in its entirety and how we communicate that in the organisation. At my level, I communicate it out through SMT and through our CEO. Then we have a company meeting every month that we kind of, all members of SMT update on their department, what they're doing, and, you know, you can access this, and this is what we've got going on. We have kind of like newsletters that we send out internally to the organisation. I also hold something, I suppose it's called doctor surgery type thing, where people can come from all different departments, sit, and fundraising, they like to come and say, well, I need this, can we see about getting it funded? And there's that kind of element, and it's, so if they want lighting funding, for example, okay, so what economic benefit is that, are we going to have for new lighting, and that kind of thing. So it's about having the conversations and having the openness that people can come to you and say, I want to do this. I understand that it's not what you're saying that we need to do financially, but actually it benefits us in these ways as well. And then measuring that afterwards. So say, for example, this 10K, it was quite little organisation. From my point of view, I did not run it. For the people that trained, it would probably be quite a lot, but it wasn't a great deal of organisation. And money-wise, it's brought in quite a bit of money, but actually it's got us on the map, and I actually think next year we'll probably have double the amount of runners. So yeah, so there's lots of different things to consider, but I do think communication throughout all the organisation is really key.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, so much in there that you've shared, and I think, you know, taking that holistic view of, it is, of course, it's about fundraising, but it's also about friend raising and relationships and stakeholder relations. So yeah, absolutely. Liz, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to come to you next on this one.
Yeah, sure. Sure. So I think, you know, as I said at the top of this conversation, that fundraising gala that we have internally here was set up, I think, really with a stewardship hat on. Even with that stewardship hat on, it probably brings in, at the moment, we're looking at about 3-to-1 return on investment, which is not as much as I would want it to be, is our gala. It needs to be higher than that. But bearing in mind, we don't even have an ask on the night, I think it's doing pretty well for itself, just on ticket sales. That will aim to get that much higher. Of course, I think there's a really long way that we can stretch that and get that much higher in future years. With regards to making sure that we communicate internally about those events, I think it is absolutely all the things that Elizabeth said, making sure that SMT are engaged, making sure they know what the purpose of the event is, and that it is primarily a stewardship event at the moment, with a fundraising message woven in there. As that changes, we'll have to bring them on board with us as well and take them on the journey with us. I do think that the other great thing about the gala is it unlocks other pots of money. So conversations with sponsors. So we have a corporate sponsor. They feel great about it. It unlocks more conversations with them. We have in-kind sponsors on the night. So it is bigger than that, but it's a really difficult one to qualify. Something like our press nights, you know, in terms of how do you measure return on investment on a press night? Like, you know, we're not asking for any money, but they're really important events for us. So it's one of those things that is really difficult to do, I think. But something like a gala, yeah, we'd like to see that it's nudging up towards, you know, Elizabeth's 4-to-1 or even the 5-to-1, or even more than that if we can squeeze it any further.
Let's hope so, Liz. Thank you so much. And I'm excited to sort of stay up to date on how that event rolls out in the future, and how you start to perhaps change the shape of that as things move forward. I'm afraid we're going to have to wind us down to a close, which is a great shame, but perhaps we need to do a part 2, because it feels like there is just so much more that we can explore, whether it's galas or, as Elizabeth was touching on earlier, those challenge events. That's a really interesting area as well, I think, where we're seeing the cultural sector more and more actually sort of find its place in those forums. So I would just like to say a huge thank you to both Elizabeth and to Liz for sharing their thoughts and their experiences, and of course everybody watching today. You can continue the conversation, of course, over on Achates Community, which is our newly launched digital platform, the biggest evolution to date. Achates Community is dedicated to supporting and empowering cultural sector income generation professionals, offering the support, knowledge and resources that we need to excel in our roles and to really be catalysts for meaningful change within our organisations, all using the purpose-led and audience-informed approach. You can visit our website, achates.org.uk, to find out more about how to subscribe and to sign up today. And finally, just to note that our next Achates Live will be on Thursday, the 14th of November. There'll be more details to follow soon on that, of course, so do keep an eye on your inbox. And so it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you back with us again next month. Bye for now.